I was constantly losing jewelry and cash that I kept in our home safe. After I secretly installed a hidden camera, I discovered it was my mother-in-law who had been stealing from me. But when I confronted her, my husband beat me until my leg broke. They locked me in the basement, saying, "This is your place now. Rot in here." I managed to grab a phone I'd hidden and called a number I hadn't dialed in 10 years. I wouldn't let those ungrateful monsters get away with it and live in peace. The marriage of Amelia and Frank Miller had, at first, flowed like a calm river. The two-story colonial they lived in, nestled in a quiet suburban cul-de-sac, was a testament to Frank's hard work. At least, that's what Frank proudly told everyone. Amelia would just smile, hiding the fact that the majority of the down payment had come from a personal trust fund she never mentioned. Amelia was a simple woman. Though she came from an immensely wealthy background, she chose an unpretentious life, wearing modest clothes and dedicating herself to being a good homemaker for Frank. She loved her husband sincerely, even leaving behind the opulence of her family to build an independent life with him. But that tranquility began to crack a month ago, the day Helen arrived with her oversized suitcases and announced she was moving in. Initially, Amelia welcomed her mother-in-law with open arms, believing that caring for an elder was a noble thing to do. But as the days turned into weeks, Amelia felt a drastic shift in her own home. The air grew heavy, suffocating. Helen had two distinctly different faces. In front of Frank, she was a frail, loving mother, often complaining about her recurring arthritis. But the moment Frank left for work and the front door clicked shut, the old woman's eyes would turn sharp and demanding. She ordered Amelia around like a hired maid, criticizing her cooking as too bland or too salty, and making snide remarks about how lucky Amelia was to have married her handsome, successful son. The real trouble began when small things started to disappear. First, it was just the grocery money Amelia left on the kitchen counter. Amelia was certain she'd placed a crisp $50 bill there, but when she returned from the bathroom, it was gone. When she asked Helen, the woman answered curtly that she hadn't seen anything and accused Amelia of becoming forgetful in her youth. Amelia let it go. She thought maybe she had been mistaken or had dropped it. She didn't want to start a fight and disrupt the household peace. But the incidents kept happening, with increasing frequency and for larger amounts. The breaking point came a week ago. A gold ring, an heirloom from her late grandmother, vanished from her jewelry box. It wasn't just any ring. Its monetary value was modest to the wealthy, but its sentimental value to Amelia was immeasurable. Amelia panicked. She tore her bedroom apart, searching every corner, under the bed, even in the pockets of clothes hanging in the closet. Nothing. The ring had vanished without a trace. With a pounding heart, she gathered the courage to speak to Frank that evening when he came home from work. He had just taken off his tie and sat down on the living room sofa when Amelia approached him, her face pale. She told him about the missing ring and the cash that had disappeared before. She spoke carefully, trying not to accuse anyone directly, but implying that these things only started happening after someone else came to live in the house. Frank's reaction was completely unexpected. He showed no empathy, no concern. His face turned red with anger. He slammed the TV remote down on the coffee table. Staring at Amelia with a piercing gaze, he began to berate her, calling her a careless and incompetent wife. His voice rose as he accused her of making up stories to corner his mother. According to Frank, it was impossible for Helen to take those things because his mother was a devout, God-fearing woman. He called Amelia a woman with a dirty heart for daring to suspect her own mother-in-law. Amelia could only look down, holding back the tears welling in her eyes. She never imagined her husband would react so harshly without even trying to hear her out. The commotion brought Helen out of her room. The old woman hobbled out, her face a mask of feigned confusion. Upon hearing Frank's complaints about Amelia's accusations, Helen immediately collapsed to the floor, wailing hysterically. She beat her own chest, screaming that she'd rather be dead than be accused of theft by her daughter-in-law. She lamented that she knew she was just an old burden, so it was only natural that Amelia would try to kick her out by slandering her. Helen's acting was so convincing that it made Frank even more furious with Amelia. The night ended with Frank yelling at Amelia to apologize and kiss his mother's feet. To de-escalate the situation, Amelia performed the humiliating act, though her heart screamed in protest. The next day, the atmosphere in the house was incredibly tense. Amelia chose to remain silent, doing her chores like a robot. In the afternoon, Rachel, Frank's younger sister, came to visit. Rachel was a young woman whose lifestyle far exceeded her income. She arrived with a sweet but fake-feeling smile, greeting her mother with a tight hug. Amelia served coffee and cookies in the living room, trying to be a polite host. Rachel chattered on about her friends who had just returned from a vacation in Europe and how much she wanted a trendy new handbag. As Amelia was pouring coffee into Rachel's cup, her eyes caught a glint of something peeking out of Rachel's open purse on the table. Amelia's heart seemed to stop. She recognized that sparkle. It was a gold brooch shaped like a jasmine flower with a small diamond in the center. The brooch was part of Amelia's collection, which she kept in a small safe in their walk-in closet. Amelia was positive she had locked the safe, and she always kept the key with her, or hidden in a place only she knew. How could that brooch be in Rachel's purse? Amelia struggled to control herself. Her hand trembled slightly as she placed the coffee pot back on the tray. She didn't confront Rachel right then and there. She knew her position was weak. If she accused Rachel now, Rachel would deny it, and Helen would start her drama all over again. Frank would undoubtedly defend his sister and mother. Amelia needed hard evidence, undeniable proof that would shut them all up. Amelia slowly backed away toward the kitchen, leaving the mother and daughter laughing in the living room. In the kitchen, she leaned against the cool wall, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She now understood her enemy wasn't forgetfulness or carelessness, but greedy human beings living under the same roof. She realized the key to the safe she had so carefully hidden must have been found, or perhaps duplicated. The thought sent a chill down her spine. The house that was supposed to be her sanctuary now felt like a den of thieves. Amelia reached into her pocket and pulled out her smartphone. With trembling but determined fingers, she opened an online shopping app. She typed "hidden mini camera" into the search bar. She chose the smallest model, one disguised as a regular phone charger that wouldn't arouse suspicion when plugged into a wall outlet. She ordered 2 with express delivery. She didn't care about the price. She had to know the truth, and soon. She had to see with her own eyes who was behind all of this. Amelia stared at her phone screen, which showed her order being processed. Her resolve was set. She would no longer be the foolish, silent daughter-in-law. If they wanted to play with fire, Amelia would make sure they all got burned. That day, behind her gentle demeanor while serving Rachel and Helen lunch, her mind was already plotting. She would let them feel victorious a little longer before she ripped off their masks, one by one. The package Amelia was waiting for arrived late that afternoon, delivered by a courier when Frank was still at work and Helen was taking her afternoon nap. Amelia quickly snatched the small box and took it to the bathroom. She carefully opened it and disposed of the cardboard in the outside recycling bin to leave no trace. 2 spy cameras, disguised as charger adapters, were now in her hands. Her heart pounded a mix of fear of being caught and the adrenaline of uncovering the truth. She had to place them in strategic but inconspicuous locations. Amelia decided to install one camera in the living room, aimed directly at the hallway leading to the master bedroom, and the other inside her bedroom. She waited for the right moment. The opportunity came when Frank got home from work and was in the shower, while Helen was engrossed in a soap opera in the family room with the volume turned up high. Amelia slipped into the bedroom and plugged the first camera into an outlet next to the vanity, a perfect position to view the closet where the safe was. Its uncanny resemblance to a phone charger meant no one would suspect the tiny lens hidden within. She had already disabled the indicator light through the app, so the device appeared inert and harmless. After setting up the one in the bedroom, Amelia went to the living room. Pretending to dust near a side table, she quickly swapped the old phone charger with the second spy camera. Its position was strategic, monitoring anyone entering or leaving their private area of the house. After ensuring everything was connected to the app on her phone, Amelia breathed a sigh of relief. Now, these digital eyes would be silent witnesses to everything that happened in the house, 24/7. She hid the app inside a locked folder on her phone, making sure Frank wouldn't accidentally find it if he ever borrowed her device. That evening, the house felt normal. Frank ate dinner heartily without much conversation, while Helen chattered on about a neighbor she found arrogant. Amelia responded minimally. Her mind wasn't at the dinner table, it was on her phone screen and what she might discover. After dinner, Frank complained of being tired and went to bed early. Amelia followed him into the bedroom. She deliberately left her wallet, containing a significant amount of cash, on top of the vanity, as if she had forgotten to put it away. She also left the closet door slightly ajar, revealing the small safe inside. It was bait. The clock struck 1 a.m. Frank was fast asleep beside her, his soft snores rhythmic. Amelia lay on her side, facing away from him. Her eyes were closed, but she was fully awake. An hour passed. There was no sound other than the chirping of crickets outside and Frank's breathing. Amelia began to think nothing would happen tonight. Maybe the thief was taking a night off, or felt satisfied with their previous hauls. But just as sleep began to creep in, Amelia heard the bedroom door creak open with extreme slowness. She held her breath, not daring to move a muscle. She kept her eyes shut, regulating her breathing to mimic someone in a deep sleep. Footsteps approached, so light they were almost silent, like a cat stalking its prey. Amelia sensed someone near the vanity. Her heart raced so fast she was afraid the intruder would hear it. She heard a drawer open, then the faint jingle of keys. Amelia knew that sound. It was the key to the safe. In the darkness under the covers, Amelia slowly cracked her eyes open, peeking through a tiny gap. She couldn't see clearly in the dim room, lit only by a sliver of moonlight through the curtains. But she didn't need to see directly. She had the camera recording. She waited until the figure left the room. After a few minutes that felt like an eternity, the person finally slipped out, closing the door with painstaking care. Amelia waited another 5 minutes to be sure. Then, she slowly reached for her phone, which she had hidden under her pillow. With hands shaking violently, she opened the CCTV app. She rewound the footage to 10 minutes ago. Her screen displayed a crystal-clear, black and white night vision image. The bedroom door opened. Helen entered, wearing her nightgown. The old woman's face looked cold and focused, nothing like the frail, sickly woman she pretended to be. She walked purposefully towards the closet. What made Amelia's blood run cold was what happened next. Helen pulled a key from her pocket, a duplicate, made who knows when, and easily opened Amelia's safe. On the screen, Amelia watched as Helen took a stack of cash Amelia had saved for emergencies, as well as a white gold necklace. Helen held the money to her nose and inhaled deeply, a grotesque sneer on her face, before stuffing it into her pocket. Amelia felt sick watching such naked greed. But the night's shock wasn't over. The video continued to play. Just as Helen was about to close the safe, the bedroom door opened again. Frank walked in. Amelia clapped a hand over her mouth, stifling a scream. On the screen, Frank saw his mother holding the cash and jewelry in front of the open safe. He wasn't angry. He wasn't surprised. He simply grinned. He approached his mother. Through the camera's sensitive microphone, Amelia could hear their whispers clearly in the dead of night. "Get a good haul tonight, Mom?" Frank chuckled softly. "Not bad, Frankie. Your wife is a fool. She saves so much but never notices it disappearing bit by bit," Helen replied, handing Frank several $100 bills. Frank took the money and smelled it. "Good. Take it all, Mom. Besides, a wife's property is her husband's property. Amelia is too stingy. We just have to be smart about taking what's ours. She'll never know. And if she does, she won't dare stand up to you. I'll handle her if she gets whiny." Those words hit Amelia harder than any physical blow. Her husband, the man she had respected and served with all her heart, was an accomplice to the thief plundering her home. Frank didn't just let his mother steal. He enjoyed the profits and actively supported the crime. Frank had betrayed their marriage in the most despicable way. Tears of rage streamed down Amelia's cheeks. Her body shook violently, not from fear, but from a sudden, overwhelming surge of disgust and hatred. She felt like an idiot. All this time, she had been sleeping next to the enemy. She had cared for and fed the snakes that were now strangling her. Unconsciously, her hand bumped a glass of water on the nightstand. Crash! The glass fell and shattered on the hardwood floor. The sound was deafening in the silence of the night. On her phone screen, Amelia saw the recorded versions of Frank and Helen jump in surprise. But in the real world, the bedroom door was suddenly thrown open with a violent bang. The light flickered on, blinding Amelia. Standing in the doorway were Frank and Helen. Their faces were pale with shock, which quickly morphed into guarded suspicion when they saw Amelia sitting up in bed, clutching her phone. They saw the shattered glass on the floor. Then their gazes shifted to Amelia's tear-streaked face, her eyes blazing with fury. Amelia no longer looked down. She lifted her head and stared directly at her husband and mother-in-law. That night, the masks had come off, and the real war had just begun. The atmosphere in the master bedroom instantly became a silent, deadly battlefield. The scattered shards of glass reflected the harsh overhead light, creating sharp glints that matched the tension in the air. Amelia stood beside the bed, her hand gripping her phone so tightly it was her only shield. Across from her, Frank and Helen stood frozen. The shock on their faces slowly gave way to something else. There was no shame, no guilt for being caught red-handed. Instead, their expressions twisted into raw fury, as if Amelia was the one at fault for interrupting their little party and exposing the rot they had hidden so well. Amelia refused to let fear rule her anymore. She held up her phone, displaying the screen that was still playing the video of their crime. Her voice trembled with rage as she declared she knew everything. She listed their sins one by one: the missing grocery money, her grandmother's ring, and the disgusting conversation they just had in front of the safe. She demanded an explanation, an apology, and the return of everything they had taken. She thought that with such solid proof, Frank would fall to his knees and beg for forgiveness, or at least feel some remorse. But her hopes were shattered when a cynical smirk spread across her husband's face. Frank stepped forward and swatted her hand, sending the phone flying onto the bed. He laughed, a condescending sound, calling her an ungrateful wife. According to Frank, everything in this house was his as the head of the family, so he had the right to do whatever he wanted with it, including sharing it with his mother. Helen, emboldened by her son's defense, joined the attack. The old woman lunged forward and, without warning, slapped Amelia hard across the face. The sound echoed in the quiet room. Amelia's cheek stung, but the pain in her heart was far worse. Helen screamed curses at her, calling her a disloyal daughter-in-law for daring to spy on her own family with a fancy gadget. For the first time in their marriage, Amelia fought back. She shoved Helen's shoulder to get her away. She screamed that she was not a cash cow to be milked, and then kicked aside. Amelia threatened to take the recording to the police and have them both thrown in jail for theft and domestic abuse. Hearing the word police, Frank's eyes darkened. The threat awakened the demon within him. He couldn't let his reputation and freedom be destroyed by his wife's whining. His gaze darted to the corner of the room where he kept his golf bag. In a swift motion, he grabbed a heavy iron from the bag. Amelia backed away in terror as Frank approached, the club in his hand. His look was no longer that of a husband, but of a predator, ready to eliminate its prey. She tried to run for the door, but Helen deftly stuck out a leg, tripping her. Amelia fell hard onto the floor. Before she could get up, Frank was standing over her. Without mercy, he swung the iron with all his might, aiming for her right leg. A sickening crack of bone echoed through the house, followed by Amelia's soul-tearing scream. An excruciating pain shot from her leg through her entire body, making her vision go white for a moment. Her leg was broken, her shin shattered by the cold steel. Amelia groaned in agony, clutching her leg, which was now bent at an unnatural angle. But the torture wasn't over. Frank grabbed a fistful of her hair, forcing her to look at his vicious face. He snarled that this was a lesson for a wife who dared to defy her husband. Helen cackled with satisfaction, watching her daughter-in-law writhe in pain. She even spat on Amelia's face, which was slick with tears and cold sweat. Frank then dragged Amelia's body out of the room. She tried to fight, her fingernails scratching futilely at the wooden floor, but the pain in her leg left her helpless. She was dragged through the living room like a sack of trash, toward the back of the house. They stopped at the door to the old, musty basement. It was cramped, damp, and filled with dusty, forgotten junk. Frank kicked the door open and threw her inside. Amelia landed hard on the cold, dirty concrete floor. Dust billowed up, choking her. Frank stood in the doorway, his silhouette menacing under the pale moonlight. He looked down at her with disgust, as if disposing of unwanted filth. He declared in a chilling tone that the basement was a fitting place for her. He announced that from this night on, she was no longer the lady of the house. She would be locked up until she learned how to be an obedient dog that didn't bark too much. He also informed her that all her assets, savings, and jewelry were now officially his and Helen's. Before slamming the door, Frank snatched her smartphone, which she had managed to grab on her way out. He made sure she had no way to contact the outside world. The basement door was slammed shut, and she heard a key turn in the lock. Complete darkness enveloped her. In that terrifying blackness, amidst the unbearable pain in her broken leg, Amelia heard Frank's final shout from behind the door, telling her to rot in there forever. Time seemed to stand still in the dark, stuffy basement. Amelia didn't know how long she had been lying on the cold concrete floor, maybe 2 days, maybe more. The sharp pain in her broken right leg had turned into a hot, throbbing ache that radiated up to her thigh. Her leg was swollen to twice its normal size and was turning a deep, bruised purple. Without medicine, medical attention, or a single bite of food, her body was slowly giving out. Her lips were cracked and bleeding from severe dehydration. Her throat felt like it was being scraped with a knife every time she tried to swallow the little saliva she had left. Her only companions were the rats that occasionally squeaked and scurried in the corners and the musty smell of damp cardboard boxes. Amidst the physical torment, the mental anguish was even worse. Through a small ventilation grate high on the wall, Amelia could hear sounds of life from the main house. She heard Frank's boisterous laughter. She heard Helen's shrill voice berating a new cleaning lady they could afford one now. She heard loud music blasting, the delicious smells of barbecue and spices wafted into the basement, torturing her empty stomach. They were celebrating. They were celebrating their victory on top of her suffering, celebrating their control over assets that weren't theirs, while the rightful owner was dying in the back basement like a stray animal. Her consciousness began to fade in and out. In a semi-lucid state, memories flashed before her eyes. She remembered who she really was. She wasn't just Amelia, the meek wife. She was the daughter of the Bradshaw family, one of the most influential business dynasties in the country. 10 years ago, she had walked away from her family, shed her famous name, and cut off all contact to pursue what she thought was Frank's genuine love. She remembered her father's disappointment and the fury of Derek, her adoptive older brother and her father's right-hand man, when she chose to run away. Before she left, Derek had forced her to take a small, old-fashioned burner phone. It had a battery that lasted for weeks and a special satellite signal. "If the world ever turns its back on you," he had said, "call the number saved in here." Amelia's eyes snapped open. The memory of that phone jolted her out of her despair. She had never used it, but she had always kept it, like a good luck charm. Because it was so small and thin, she had sewn it into the lining of an old winter coat stored in the basement. Frank didn't know about it. He had only taken her smartphone. With the last of her strength, Amelia forced herself to sit up. Every small movement sent waves of excruciating pain from her broken leg, making her hiss. With shaking hands and cold sweat pouring down her face, she crawled towards a stack of boxes where she remembered seeing the coat. Her fumbling, stiff fingers found the hard, rectangular object. It was there. It was still there. She pulled out the small black phone. With a soaring hope mixed with gut-wrenching fear, she pressed the power button. The small monochrome screen flickered to life. The battery indicator showed only a single, final bar, blinking a weak red. This was her one and only chance. If this call failed, she would die here. Amelia pressed the speed dial for the only number saved in the phone. The name on the screen was a single word, Derek. She pressed the phone to her ear. The ringing tone began. Each ring felt like an eternity. Her heart hammered against her ribs, terrified that no one would answer or that the number was no longer active after a decade. Tears streamed down her cheeks again, this time not of pain, but of profound regret. She regretted ignoring her family for a monster like Frank. Suddenly, the ringing stopped. There was a soft click. The call connected. A moment of silence from the other end. Then, a deep, cold, yet achingly familiar baritone voice. The voice that had always protected her. "Hello?" The voice was flat, but laced with a sharp vigilance. Amelia's throat tightened. She tried to speak, but only a hoarse gasp came out. She gathered all her remaining energy, forcing her vocal cords to work. "Derek," she whispered, her voice broken and weak, but filled with indescribable pain. There was a tense silence on the other end. Amelia could feel the sudden surge of urgency. Derek's voice changed, no longer flat, but filled with a terrifying immediacy. "Amelia? Is that you? Where are you? Why are you calling now?" he asked in a rapid-fire burst. Amelia didn't have time to explain everything. Her consciousness was slipping, and the phone's battery was blinking faster. She had to get the message across. "Help me, Derek," she stammered, tears dripping onto the filthy floor. "Frank and his mother, they locked me in the basement. My leg is broken. They want me to die here." She took one last, painful breath before uttering her final sentence, filled with all the venom she could muster, a sentence that would change everyone's fate. "Don't let these ungrateful bastards get away with it. Don't let them live in peace. Ruin them, Derek. Ruin them." Before Derek could reply, the screen went black. The battery was dead. Darkness consumed Amelia once more. The phone slipped from her weakened grasp. Her body collapsed back onto the floor. But this time, a faint smile touched her lips before she lost consciousness. She knew the message had been delivered. She knew the sleeping lion had been awakened. Help was coming. And when it did, hell would move from this basement into the main house. Hours after the call disconnected, Amelia lay unconscious on the cold basement floor. Outside, Frank and Helen slept soundly, dreaming of their newfound wealth, oblivious to the fact that elite predators were now closing in on their suburban home. 3 hours after Amelia's call, the atmosphere around the house shifted. A black, unmarked van stopped at the far end of the street. 6 figures dressed in black tactical gear emerged, moving with the silent efficiency of a special operations unit. They weren't police. They were an elite, private security team under the direct command of Derek Bradshaw. They vaulted the fence without a sound. One of them disabled the home security system, including the very cameras Amelia had installed, leaving no digital trace of their presence. 2 team members slipped into the house through a kitchen window, their task to neutralize the occupants without waking them. A low-dose sleeping gas was pumped through the vents into Frank and Helen's bedrooms, plunging them into an even deeper, unbreakable slumber. Meanwhile, Derek himself led the team to the basement door. The powerfully built man stared at the padlock, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists. He didn't wait for his men to pick the lock. With a single, sharp snap from a pair of hydraulic bolt cutters, the chain broke. The door swung open. Tactical flashlights cut through the darkness, and what Derek saw made his blood boil. There, crumpled in a corner amidst dusty boxes and cobwebs, was the woman he knew as his vibrant, graceful sister. Now, she was emaciated, her face deathly pale, her leg grotesquely swollen and bent at an impossible angle. Derek knelt beside her, gently covering her frail body with his own jacket. His hands, usually steady holding a weapon, trembled as he touched her cheek. Amelia's eyes fluttered open. She recognized the familiar, masculine scent of his cologne. Her lips moved, silently forming his name. Without a word, Derek lifted her as carefully as if she were made of fractured glass. An accompanying field medic immediately administered an IV and a high dose of painkillers. Amelia was safe, but Derek's mission was far from over. He glanced back at the basement, the place where his sister was tortured. He wanted to kill Frank right then, but Amelia had asked for a retribution more painful than a simple death. He would let them think they had won before dragging them down to the lowest circle of hell. Following the plan, Derek's team set the stage. They placed a medical mannequin, made of a material that would mimic human tissue when burned, where Amelia had been lying, dressed in a scrap of her clothing. After Amelia was secured in a medical van, a team member doused the basement with a special, odorless accelerant. Derek lit a lighter, stared at the small flame with cold fury, and tossed it onto a pile of cardboard. The fire erupted, greedily consuming the contents of the basement. The team vanished into the night as quickly as they had arrived, leaving behind a growing inferno that would be the start of Frank's nightmare. By dawn, the fire had engulfed the entire back section of the house. Neighbors awoke to the smell of smoke and the terrifying glow against the morning sky. Sirens wailed, breaking the suburban quiet. Frank and Helen were jolted awake, choking on the smoke that had begun to seep into the main house. They ran outside in a genuine panic, terrified the fire would spread to their precious home. As firefighters battled the blaze, Frank stood frozen, staring at the charred remains of the basement. He knew Amelia was in there. If the basement was gone, she was gone too. A fire chief approached him with a somber expression. He delivered the news Frank was both anticipating and dreading. They had found what was left of a body, burned beyond recognition, but presumed to be a victim trapped in the fire. At that, Helen began to scream, not out of grief for Amelia, but as the opening act of her greatest performance yet. In front of the gathering neighbors, she wailed Amelia's name, crying about how devastated she was to lose her beloved daughter-in-law. Frank played his part too, falling to his knees and burying his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with fake sobs. But behind his palms, a small, triumphant smile played on his lips. His problem was gone. His annoying wife had vanished. And now, all her assets, the house, and her savings would fall into his hands, uncontested. That morning, amidst fake tears and black smoke, marked the death of Amelia and the birth of the true monster inside Frank. 6 months had passed since the fire that supposedly killed Amelia. For Frank and Helen, it was a golden age. Amelia's life insurance policy, which, for some reason, paid out remarkably fast, and for a sum far larger than Frank had anticipated, had drastically changed their lifestyle. The once minimalist house was now a gaudy monstrosity with fake gold pillars and marble statues in the front yard. Frank bought a flashy new red sports car, which he always parked ostentatiously in the driveway. He now wore designer suits and a gleaming luxury watch, walking with his chin held high as if he owned the world. Helen was no different. The old woman looked like a walking jewelry store, her arms laden with gold bangles and a thick chain around her neck. She spent her days shopping at high-end malls and showing off her wealth to anyone who would look. Frank's sisters, Rachel and Sarah, also moved in, leeching off the new fortune, throwing lavish parties and living a life of debauchery. They had completely forgotten that their luxury was built on the blood and pain of the woman they had tormented. They felt invincible, untouchable. But in the shadows, Amelia was undergoing her own metamorphosis. For 6 months, she was hidden away in a state-of-the-art medical rehabilitation facility owned by the Bradshaw family overseas. The world's best orthopedic surgeons operated on her shattered leg. The recovery was grueling, filled with daily, painful physical therapy as she learned to walk again. Whenever she felt like giving up, the image of Frank's face as he swung the club and Helen's laughter would fuel her determination. She healed not only her body but also transformed her appearance. Her once plain face was now sculpted by top-tier skincare and bold makeup. Her fashion sense evolved into something elegant, powerful, and intimidating. She was no longer Amelia, the meek victim. She was reborn as Mia Bradshaw, a cold, calculating real estate investor with seemingly limitless wealth. The wheel of fortune began to turn for Frank when the mid-sized construction firm where he worked fell on hard times. Rumor had it the company was on the verge of bankruptcy and was about to be acquired by a massive investment group called Phoenix Capital. Frank panicked, afraid of losing the manager position he had just secured by bribing his boss with Amelia's insurance money. But then came news that the new owners would retain existing employees and even offer huge bonuses to high-performing managers. Frank's soaring ego convinced him he would be the new owner's golden boy. He prepared his best presentation, wore his most expensive suit, and doused himself in cologne on the day of the first meeting with the new investor. The day arrived. The office was tense. Frank stood at the front of the line of executives, a confident smile plastered on his face. The doors to the main conference room opened. In walked several imposing bodyguards, followed by an assistant, and finally, the main figure. A tall, statuesque woman entered. She wore a pristine white power suit that fit her perfectly, paired with a stylish silk headscarf. Large, dark sunglasses concealed her eyes, but the aura of power she radiated was so intense it seemed to chill the air. The click-clack of her high heels echoed on the marble floor, a countdown to the end of Frank's reign. The woman sat at the head of the long table. Frank, seated directly across from her, felt a strange sense of familiarity, but his mind refused to connect the dots. The woman's assistant introduced the new head of Phoenix Capital as Miss Mia Bradshaw, a young billionaire recently returned from Europe. A shiver went down Frank's spine at the name. Mia, so close to Amelia. Impossible, he thought. Amelia is Ash. Mr. Miller. The woman's voice cut through his thoughts. It was clear, commanding, and as cold as ice. This was not Amelia's soft, timid voice. I hear you're the most ambitious manager here. I've read your division's financial reports. Very interesting. Frank swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. Thank you, Miss Bradshaw. I always give my best for the company. Slowly, the woman lifted a hand and removed her sunglasses. She stared directly into Frank's eyes. In that instant, Frank's world imploded. That face, those eyes, that nose, they all belonged to Amelia. But there was no warmth there. Her gaze was empty, dark, and as sharp as a scalpel poised to flay him alive. Frank staggered back, his legs so weak he nearly fell out of his chair. Amelia?" he stammered, his voice choked, his face ashen. The woman didn't blink. A chillingly faint smile touched her red lips. "Amelia?" she asked, her tone laced with a delicate mockery. "I'm afraid you're mistaken, Mr. Miller. My name is Mia Bradshaw. I heard your wife passed away in a tragic fire 6 months ago. Faulty wiring, wasn't it? Or so the police report says." Her words were deliberate, heavy with unspoken meaning. Frank trembled, his mind racing. Logic told him Amelia was dead, but his gut screamed that the woman before him was a nightmare resurrected from the grave. "Now, Mr. Miller," Mia continued, opening a thick file and ignoring his shock. "As of today, your career is in my hands. We have a lot of work to do. I trust your legs are strong enough to keep up with my targets, unlike your poor, late wife's." That final line hit Frank like a physical blow. It wasn't a coincidence. This woman knew about Amelia's leg. Frank stared in horror as Mia put her sunglasses back on and signaled for the meeting to begin. He wasn't facing a ghost. He was facing something far more terrifying. The game of revenge had just begun. Frank's life, once a cloud-9 fantasy, quickly devolved into a living hell. The office, his former kingdom, became a torture chamber. Mia didn't fire him. She did something crueler. She buried him under an impossible workload, forcing him to manually audit years of old project files under the guise of testing his integrity. He worked past midnight every day, his eyes ringed with dark circles, his body wasting away from stress. Whenever he protested, Mia would fix him with a cold stare that silenced him. She'd make cutting, ambiguous remarks that struck at the heart of his dark secret. One afternoon, she commented, "Working until your bones ache is still better than being locked in a dark room with no food. Wouldn't you agree, Mr. Miller?" The words sent a cold dread through him. He was trapped, haunted by the paranoia that she knew everything. Meanwhile, at their garish home, Helen's life also began to unravel. A strange terror crept into the house. She constantly felt watched. Things would disappear, but only the items stolen from Amelia. The diamond ring she'd taken vanished from her drawer, replaced by a rotting dead rat. The peak of her terror came one stormy night. As she slept, wearing Amelia's favorite emerald necklace, she awoke to a cold, slick feeling around her neck. Thinking it was the chain, she reached up, only to touch not metal, but moving, scaled skin. She flicked on the lamp to see a small snake coiled around her neck. Her scream was blood-curdling. When her daughters rushed in, the snake was gone, and only the emerald necklace lay on the floor. From that night on, Helen was a wreck, paranoid and terrified of the dark. The final straw came 2 days later. Staring into her bathroom mirror, she saw words scrawled across the glass in what looked like dripping blood. "Enjoying a dead woman's fortune, are we?" Her heart seized. The image of Amelia's crying face as she was dragged to the basement flooded her mind. Guilt, long buried, rose up and choked her. She collapsed, unconscious. At the hospital, doctors diagnosed a stress-induced heart attack. When she awoke, she raved about Amelia's ghost coming for revenge, begging Frank to move and get rid of everything that belonged to her. But Frank, blinded by greed, dismissed her as delusional. He didn't realize the web Mia and Derek had woven was tightening around their necks. A week after Helen was discharged, a lavish invitation arrived at Frank's desk. It was for the annual Phoenix Capital Charity Gala, addressed to Mr. Frank Miller and family. Frank saw it as a sign that Mia was finally warming up to him, a chance to show off. He forced the still traumatized Helen to attend, along with Rachel and Sarah. They rented designer gowns and a new tuxedo, determined to look the part of a high society family. The night of the gala, the hotel ballroom was dripping with luxury. The Miller family swaggered in, oblivious to the strange whispers that followed them. The event began. As Mia took the stage, stunning in a blood-red gown, she smiled mysteriously, her eyes locking onto their table. "Good evening," her amplified voice filled the room. "Tonight, I want to show you the foundation of this company. A foundation built on honesty and justice. But first, let's watch a true story of betrayal that happened right in our community." Frank frowned. The giant screens behind the stage lit up, not with corporate charts, but with grainy, black and white footage. It was the security camera recording from their bedroom. The date and timestamp were clearly visible. The entire ballroom watched in stunned silence as Helen crept into the room, opened the safe, and pocketed the cash. Then the video showed Frank entering, laughing with his mother, and taking his share. Their incriminating conversation boomed through the speakers. Frank's face drained of all color. But the nightmare wasn't over. The footage cut to the most brutal scene. Frank, his face contorted with rage, swinging the golf club. The sickening crack of bone and Amelia's agonized scream filled the magnificent hall. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Mia pointed from the stage. "That is the true face of the manager you've all been working with. A son who conspires with his mother to rob his wife, and a husband who breaks her bones for money." Panic seized Frank. "It's a lie! It's fake!" he screamed, shoving his chair back and making a desperate run for the exit. But his escape was futile. Derek Bradshaw stood near the door, a cold, impassive statue. As Frank scrambled past, Derek casually stuck out his leg. Frank went flying, crashing face first onto the marble floor. Before he could move, Derek's polished leather shoe pinned his hand to the ground. At the same time, several men in police uniforms, who had been posing as guests, moved in, surrounding Helen, Rachel, and Sarah, who were now weeping hysterically. The party of their dreams had just become their public execution. The grand ballroom was now a silent courtroom. All eyes were on Frank, pinned to the floor like an insect. From the stage, Mia descended, her heels clicking like a metronome of doom. She walked through the parted crowd and stopped before him. Frank looked up, his last shred of denial vaporizing. In her cold eyes, he saw Amelia, the wife he thought he'd destroyed. "Amelia," he rasped, trying to play the victim one last time. "I'm so sorry. It was my mother. I missed you." He reached for the hem of her gown. Mia kicked his hand away with the tip of her shoe. She raised the microphone to her lips, her voice ringing out. "The woman named Amelia died in that basement. I am Mia Bradshaw, and I am here to claim what is mine." The name Bradshaw sent a shockwave through the room. The elites present knew that name, the dynasty behind it. They stared at Frank with a new level of contempt, realizing the magnitude of his foolishness. Mia then turned her attention to Helen and the sisters, reminding them of every stolen item, every meal they enjoyed while she starved. Cornered and humiliated, Frank lost what was left of his sanity. He let out a primal scream of rage and lunged, trying to attack Mia. But Derek was ready. In one fluid, brutal motion, he swung his leg and kicked Frank's right shin, the exact spot where Frank had struck Amelia. A loud, visceral crack echoed through the hall. Frank shrieked, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony, and collapsed, clutching his shattered, unnaturally bent leg. Karma, delivered in its most poetic form. Mia looked down at him, her expression unreadable. "That pain," she whispered, "just for him to hear, is nothing compared to the pain of being betrayed by the one you trusted most." The uniformed police swarmed in. They handcuffed Frank as he writhed on the floor. They cuffed a hysterical Helen and the sobbing sisters. As they were dragged out past a throng of flashing cameras from the press, who had been tipped off, the family's ruin was complete. Back in the ballroom, Mia stood tall, surrounded by a new circle of allies who now looked at her with awe and respect. The victim had become the victor. As the doors closed behind her tormentors, Mia took a deep, clean breath, finally free. Months turned into seasons. For Frank, time stood still in a damp, foul-smelling prison cell. He was sentenced to 15 years, but the real hell was his body. The leg Derek had broken became severely infected in the unsanitary prison conditions. He was a constant target, the lowest of the low in the prison hierarchy. The infection turned to gangrene, and to save his life, doctors had to amputate his leg below the knee. Every time he looked at the stump where his foot used to be, he was haunted by the memory of what he had done to Amelia. Helen's fate was no less grim. Weeks into her sentence, she suffered a massive stroke that left her paralyzed on one side and unable to speak. Trapped in her own body, she was completely dependent on the mercy of overworked prison staff. She spent her days lying in filth, weeping silently, consumed by a guilt that offered no escape. Her only connection to the outside world was a small TV in the prison common room. One day, a news report came on about a successful businesswoman. It was Amelia. She was radiant, poised, and happy, speaking at the dedication of a new affordable housing project she had funded. Helen stared at the screen, tears streaming down her face, her one good hand reaching out futilely. She understood then. Amelia had soared to heights she could never touch, while she had drowned in the filth of her own making. Outside the grim prison walls, life moved on. Amelia, now fully embracing her identity as Mia, stood on the balcony of her luxurious penthouse apartment, watching the sunset paint the city skyline. Derek stood beside her. They had just come from a symbolic funeral where Mia burned the last remnants of her old life. "Are you satisfied?" Derek asked softly. Mia took a sip of her tea. "It's not about satisfaction from their suffering," she said, her voice calm and strong. "It's the satisfaction of justice. The satisfaction of taking back my life. Now I can finally sleep without nightmares." She smiled, a genuine, liberating smile. "Thank you, Derek, for waking me from that long, painful dream. Now I want to focus on building, on helping other women so they never have to suffer what I did." The story closes on two simultaneous scenes. In a dark cell, a paralyzed Helen stares at a tiny sliver of sky through a barred window, the faint sound of her son's agonized groans drifting from another cell block, a symphony of eternal regret. And in a bright, beautiful penthouse high above the city, Mia steps back inside from the balcony, sliding the glass door shut, leaving the darkness of her past outside as she walks toward a future full of light, hope, and peace. The nest of snakes had been destroyed, and the queen had reclaimed her throne.